作为全美最多华人聚居的城市之一，三藩市有超过30万的亚裔人口，其中超过53%是华裔。而自从新冠疫情以来，市内针对亚裔的仇恨暴力事件增加了567%。
Vulnerable elders, right, in the Asian community are being targeted. And that's not what we can have happen. That shouldn't be who we are as San Franciscans.
从三藩市不断上升的犯罪率到前地检官博彻斯被罢免，反亚裔仇恨到底还要持续多久？大家好，欢迎收看《仇恨边缘》，我是主持人张歆艺。今天天下卫视请到三藩市地检官谢安宜一起来聊一聊，针对仇恨犯罪的指控到底有哪些挑战。Hi, dear Jenkins. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Thanks for coming to our show.
No, of course.
Could you do a little bit introduction about yourself, since a lot of people actually don't know what do you do?
Yeah, no, that's a fair question. As the district attorney's office, we are responsible for actually taking cases involving crimes to court. So when the police make an arrest, they decide that they have probable cause, which is that it's more likely than not that the person committed a crime, and they arrest them, and they make a report, and they submit the report to my office. And then we look at it and decide, is there enough proof that the person committed the crime to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt? And so if we feel that there's enough, then we file charges that go to court, and then we make sure that there is a consequence for the crime.
Yeah, so San Francisco as a city and also county, do we respond to those things differently than other counties?
No, so we just happen to be a city that is also a county, but every county in the state has its own DA's office so that they handle the crimes that happen in their county.
And you've been in the San Francisco district office since 2014?
Yes.
Since 2014. And then you are the lead of hate crime, right?
Yes, we're part of that time. So I started off in the DA's office here in San Francisco in 2014 as a volunteer in the misdemeanor unit. So I had been a lawyer for many years, but wanted to switch to become a prosecutor. And so at first I was working with cases of DUI, so driving under the influence, and petty theft and things like that. And then I went up to general felonies, which are more serious crimes. And it was there that I was also the designated hate crimes prosecutor for almost 2 years, before then handling sexual assault cases and then murder cases.
What do you see over the years?
So for most of the time that I was in the office, we had a designated hate crimes prosecutor. There was a slight shift in that for a little bit of time, where it was split amongst a few people. And then more recently, again, there's still been a designated person who handles those cases, along with other cases as well. And so that is something we're going to continue. But I also wanted to make sure that we had a special and more experienced attorney handling some different cases that may not be hate crimes, but that involve very vulnerable victims, like our elderly community, especially like we're facing right now with so many crimes against our Asian elders.
Since you say so many, do you have specific data could share with us?
Yeah, so I believe we know that there's been about a 567% rise in crimes against Asian Americans in San Francisco. And so it's been obviously a very concerning time period. I would call it an epidemic of violence against our Asian American community that is really unprecedented. It's like we haven't seen before such a specific targeting.
Why do you think we are seeing Asian hate, not hate, anti-Asian hate, just hate crime right now?
That's very difficult to answer, and I've been searching for the answer to that as well. I think that we are in a time period where people don't believe there's any consequence for their actions. I think people have felt that it is okay to target the Asian community, maybe because, they think that they have more money or things that they can get from them, and that perhaps they won't fight back. And that's, I think, based on a stereotype, really, that's unfair. And so I think that's a part of it. And I think also maybe that there's a segment of our population that did, maybe harbor some feelings after COVID and certain things that have, created some of these episodes of violence.
Does a person attacking another person based on stereotype is not belong to hate crime?
Yeah, and so the law is very specific with respect to hate crimes. It requires that we prove that the person's actions were motivated by actual hate or animus. And so that's where it gets very difficult, because usually in those cases we hear somebody say something racially offensive, right? They call someone a name that's racially hateful. In many of the situations that we're seeing with respect to the robberies, especially of the Asian elders and others, I think that we're having a lot of difficulty finding evidence of actual hate, but what I do think certainly is a part of the motivation are stereotypes, which is, like I said, that Asians carry cash or more money or more valuable items, and that there's a perception that they won't respond back violently or physically. And so these attackers feel as though there's no consequence, even in the moment, not just from the law, but even at the moment in time where they do these things, that there won't be any physical retaliation back towards them. And so that's very different than hate, even if it's based on what I call racial profiling. That's different than hate, and so it doesn't meet the standard of a hate crime, which for most people feels wrong. When you feel like you're being targeted for who you are and what you look like, it feels like a hate crime.
Yeah, I think it's very important for our audience to understand what is hate crime, what is stereotype and racism, and also what is differences between hate incident and hate crime. So we're gonna take a break and then we can talk about that.
Okay.
欢迎回到仇恨边缘，让我们继续和三藩市地检官谢安宜一起来聊一聊，对于仇恨犯罪的指控到底有哪些挑战。So, DA Jenkins, what do you think the difference is between hate incident and hate crime?
So, if it's not accompanied by an act of violence or some other crime, it is not. So, unfortunately, people can go around saying all sorts of offensive things to us and call us all sorts of names, and that alone isn't a crime. It has to be accompanied with a violent attack or some type of other, robbery or another crime that they've committed that is illegal. But unfortunately, speech alone is not illegal.
I see. So, if a person got punched and also that person saying something offensive, we can charge that hate crime.
Right. We can charge an assault or a battery as well as the hate crime enhancement, because the punch appears to be motivated by that hate, which was captured in the statement.
So why is it important to charge hate crime?
I think from a human standpoint, we want to feel like the charges in a case reflect what happened to us. And if we feel that we are being targeted, or if we are being targeted because of what we look like or our race or who we are, then it feels more satisfying to have a charge that reflects, right, that somebody was prejudiced against us or had some type of hateful feeling. The difficulty as the DA's office is that we have to abide by the law, which requires us to prove, like I said, hate. It has to be that somebody said something or did something that let us know that what motivated the attack was actually hate, not just how we feel inside or how it may be perceived. And so that's the difficult part.
And what do we do, or what does victim should do to expedite the process of the charge?
So what I think is, and this is hard because when you're in the middle of somebody attacking you, it's very difficult to then try to pay attention to what's going on around you. But it becomes important for the victims and the witnesses to really pay attention to what they hear the attackers say. right? Do you hear them say something hateful? For some of our victims, they're monolingual. They only speak one language, right? And it's not English. And so if the attacker is yelling something in English, it becomes hard for them to know even what was said and whether or not it was a racial slur. So we need witnesses who hear these things to report it. Don't just keep it inside. Make sure you contact the police and say what you heard and saw. But that's the main thing, is to make sure that people speak up about all of the facts around a circumstance, so that we have all of the information that we're looking at.
Among all the cases we've been seeing on the Stop AAPI Hate website, a lot of people don't call police because they think the police cannot do anything about that.
Yeah, I understand. Contacting the police is scary for a lot of people. It's unfamiliar, but it's the only way we're going to have accountability for these actions. And the only way that we can deter or stop them from happening is if we prove that this is a city that won't tolerate it. And the way we prove that is to make sure that there are consequences for those who are engaging in this behavior. And so that requires the police to investigate and to make arrests. And the only way they can do that is to know that this stuff is happening. And so I really urge everybody in the community to speak up, make those phone calls if something does happen. If somebody even just calls you, racial slurs, even if they haven't done anything, it's still something you should report, so that we can document that this person has a history of that type of behavior, which may become an issue later if they do attack someone, and we'll have that evidence. So it's really, really important that the community calls the police when something bad happens. It's vital to making sure that we become a city that makes it clear that we're not going to stand for this type of hate and these types of attacks.
What I learned recently is hate crime is not mandatory to be reported. Is that correct?
Right. With any crime, you don't have to report it. I mean, some people are obligated to report crimes that happen to children if you work at a school or something, but for most of us who are just out and about, living our regular lives, we don't have to report any crimes. We can just take it and go home and deal with it. But I just urge people not to do that, because we want to be protecting each other, especially our seniors. To keep seeing these attacks on the seniors is heartbreaking. I don't think many of us can stomach it anymore, and we have to be willing to protect them. And the way that we do that is to report when we see something happening.
Then for your perspective, is there anything need to be changed for the legislation level?
That's a good question, and I think we may need to examine whether or not we should develop laws that target racial profiling, right? We deal with that, of course. Most of the time we talk about racial profiling, it's to do with the police. But we also have criminal offenders that target victims based on their race. Even if it's not motivated out of hate, it's motivated out of racial stereotyping and a belief that certain victims may be easier targets for certain types of crime. And so it may be something that we need to evaluate, is whether or not we have sort of laws that protect, people from those types of attacks and those types of crimes.
It sounds like it's a long journey to change the law, right?
For legislation, yes. I mean, it can take some time. Of course, the voters ultimately have to pass it. Somebody has to draft what it is. We have to make sure that it's something that's enforceable. And how do you prove that somebody was racially profiled in respect to a crime? But I think there's a lot of brilliant minds in our society, and we can do it. And while it may take time, we never had hate crime laws in this country until maybe 50 years ago, when certain things kept happening. And so that is what has even given us the ability to have this conversation. And so this may be the time where we have this, we create other laws so that the future generations are protected.
Awesome. Okay, we'll take a break and then we'll keep talking about some updates.
Okay.
欢迎回到仇恨边缘，让我们继续和三藩市地检官谢安宜一起来聊一聊如何预防、辨认和指控仇恨犯罪。DA Jenkins, so as DA, what can you do, or your office can do to make it better?
We have created a vulnerable victims unit that will house those cases, like I said, with special prosecutor. The other thing is to make sure that from a victim services standpoint that we are reaching out more to our victims and making ourselves available. Even if you don't report the crime, you actually can still get access to resources as a victim, and we want to make sure that we have the language services necessary for our advocates to reach out to our non-English speaking victims to make sure that they are getting access to the resources that they deserve as victims, and also helping guide them through the court process, and that can be very difficult and complex, and not leave them trying to understand what's going on, especially when many of our victims are not from the United States, and so they're accustomed to other types of court systems, and so we want to be explaining to them how things work along the way. Lastly, what I'll say is we are conducting a review internally of many of the cases that have happened against, or crimes that have happened against our Asian American residents, to see if we've missed something with respect to filing a hate crime charge. And so we've been reviewing all of the evidence to make sure that the charges that are currently filed are appropriate. And also whether there's further investigation that we need to do to determine whether or not we can file a hate crime.
Are you reviewing some old charges when the former DA Chesa Bodine was in the office? Any updates on that?
Yes, and so that is a part of what we are doing. So far, I believe the unit has gone through about half of those cases, half or more, and so we are just awaiting sort of the final outcome of that. And like I said, some of the cases may require some follow-up investigation, but we're just making sure that we're looking at everything closely to make sure that they're charged correctly. And then also doing outreach to the community to explain, like we're doing today, what constitutes a hate crime under the law, what it takes to prove that, and why in certain cases, even though it feels very wrong to us not to have the hate crime charged, why it is that we can't from a legal standpoint.
You said something that was not in the office, and now you had it.
It is the Vulnerable Victims Unit. So that is something that is newly created for, it is led by Nancy Tung, who I hired to be the chief of that unit, and so it now handles cases involving vulnerable victims, which include children if it's not a sex crime, and our elderly victims, as well as the hate crimes cases.
What's the difference of those two units?
So hate crimes will fall under vulnerable victims as well. And so it's basically just taking those cases out of the units that were with our younger attorneys who handle a lot of different kinds of cases, and now they're being handled by one or two attorneys who will specialize in these types of cases.
Got it. So in your perspective, how can we make it better from different perspectives?
I think we need to work more on unifying our different cultures. We should want to embrace one another. We should learn to love our different cultures. I have had such a great time being embraced really by the Chinese culture in San Francisco over the last year, and getting to go to all the different festivals like the Autumn Moon Festival, and really seeing the culture up close. And that's what we should be doing, is exposing our children, especially in the schools, to each other's cultures in a way that makes us love each other and see that there's less different about us, that we're actually all quite similar. And so I think if we keep working at that, that will help. I also want to really be fostering a discussion between, like I said, the different communities in San Francisco about what's going on and how we get this to stop. I don't think we can just prosecute. I think we have to really promote unity and have a conversation about how we've gotten to the point where vulnerable elders, right, in the Asian community are being targeted and beaten. And that's not what we can have happen. That shouldn't be who we are as San Franciscans and what we should accept. And we need to start talking about how we got to that point and how we get past it.
Where do you see the hate crime in the future?
I'm hoping that with the work that we're doing in our office to really demonstrate that now this won't be tolerated here, that there are consequences, that we will see these numbers of crimes decrease. And again, as we start having this dialogue and I start setting the tone that this is completely unacceptable, that people realize this has to stop. I can't take seeing one more video, I don't think anyone else can, of an elderly Asian victim being beaten or robbed. I don't want to go into another community. Yesterday I was speaking with Asian elders at an event, and to hear that they don't feel safe even going to the grocery store, that can't be the way that we live here in San Francisco. And so I hope that the work that we do, not only to prosecute those who have committed these crimes, but like I said, to engage in the greater discussion, will make sure that these crimes start to decrease very quickly.
And I remember in the previous media roundtable, you mentioned that even though, for example, Greg Chu, that case, the prosecutor didn't charge hate crime yet, but you will make sure that guy accountable.
Absolutely, absolutely. The hate crime enhancement, while I understand why everybody wants to see that, accountability doesn't stop there. And we're going to make sure that based on the charges that are filed, that there are serious consequences for those who have committed these hateful acts. They will absolutely understand that it's unacceptable. We will make sure that there is accountability based on what's charged, even if we can't, file a hate crime charge. There's still accountability, and everybody will see that. And we will be very transparent about what that looks like.
Awesome. Thank you, DA Jenkins.
Thank you.
好，今天的节目就告一段落。仇恨边缘是一档聚焦反亚裔仇恨犯罪的访谈节目。我们今后还会请到更多的政客、专家以及教授一起来探讨仇恨犯罪。我们也希望这个节目被更多需要帮助和需要了解的人看到。让我们一起努力，把周围变成一个充满爱而不是恨的地方。我是主持人张歆艺，我们下期节目见。正在收看节目的你，如果有任何问题想要问我们的来宾，欢迎在评论区留言，我们会仔细查看每一条评论，并联系该嘉宾帮忙解答。让我们共同努力，为停止仇恨犯罪贡献一份力量。